political issues surrounding diversity. And in particular, these skeptics suggest that when we implement the logic of diversity, it, to some people, suggests that there are some social categories that are more deserving of privilege than are others. It is saying that often when we embrace diversity, it is sending a signal that there are people who we claim that they have been excluded, but it is lifting them to the level of being special in some sense. And for this reason, it creates political problems throughout the culture of these organizations. And even more cynical than that is the viewpoint that diversity is associated with lower quality because it places lower performing people in positions for which they are not suited. And so you have all of these reasons why skeptics of this business case for diversity make the claim that diversity is not all that it's cracked up to be, and in fact, it can do much more harm to the functioning of organizations than good for the functioning of organizations, especially businesses. So, with this, let me suggest to you that I was fortunate to be able to carry out research on these competing expectations about the impact of diversity. As you see, there are competing predictions about what link, if any, there is between especially racial diversity, racial and ethnic composition of firms, and business outcomes. And I would suggest to you that, and I'm trying to say this in modesty, but before my research, many people had made these claims. Many people had made these claims, and we see it as part of almost business lore these days, that we make the claim that diversity pays and we wave our hands and so be it. And you have chancellors and presidents of colleges and universities saying that diversity is good and it shall be. But the question is it truly that way? And so what I'd like to do is to suggest to you that many of these claims, even though they are repeated, have gone unexamined empirically. And so what I'd like to do is suggest to you that it's not clear what effect, if any, diversity has on business success of firms and related outcomes. Again, trying not to be too immodest, but I do want to say to you that I did carry out research, and my research was reported as was published in the American Sociological Review, which is one of the leading social science journals, and was reported as being one of the 5 best articles on diversity by Diversity Inc. And I don't know if people know that source or trust that source or what have you, but it is the kind of thing that did gather national attention, even international attention, and raised questions about, so does diversity pay? What I'd like to do today is share with you some of the results of my research and some of the efforts that I put forth. So, this says 4 hypotheses. I actually had 8 hypotheses, but they were parallel. And so what I'll do is talk about these and then suggest to you that in addition to these 4 hypotheses, I also had parallel hypotheses that talked about the impact of gender diversity on business outcomes. So hypothesis number 1, the more racial workforce diversity a business organization has, the greater that business organization's sales revenue will be. Number 2, the more racial workforce diversity a business organization has, the more customers that business organization will have. Number 3, the more racial workforce diversity a business organization has, the larger market share that business organization will have. And number 4, the more diversity, the greater that business organization's profits will be relative to its competitors. And so these are hypotheses that are all stated in the form of, these are things that we would expect to be true if in fact the business case for diversity thesis is accurate. Okay? Now, to examine these hypotheses, I used data from the National Organization of Surveys. And these data were from 1,000 organizations where there was a stratified random sample of work establishments from Dun & Bradstreet's Information Services data file. And Dun & Bradstreet actually went to these businesses and got characteristics about their profits, their earnings, their number of customers, etc. And I was able to link that to the racial and ethnic and gender composition of these companies, along with other kinds of characteristics of these companies. And so, as outcomes, we were looking at things like the sales revenue, the number of customers, market share, and profitability of these companies. And in addition to these kinds of characteristics, there were some other things that we could also look at. I will not be sharing that with you today, but these are, in fact, other things that can be looked at. So, if these hypotheses are correct, we would expect I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let me just show you the distribution of the level and amount of diversity of these different firms. And what we see is that 30% of these businesses were low on diversity, 27% of them were in the range of what we would refer to as medium diversity, and 43% of them high diversity. And I could go into the details of how we measured it if people are interested in those kinds of things. But let me turn now to some of the preliminary results. Let's look at average sales revenue by levels of racial ethnic diversity. These patterns are fully consistent with the business case for diversity thesis. This chart shows, for example, that those organizations that were low on diversity had annual earnings, sales revenue, of 52 million compared with 384 million compared to 761 million for those of high diversity. And so this is fully consistent with what we would expect from the business case for diversity. Number of customers, we see similar patterns where we have roughly 22,000 in companies that are low in diversity, 30,000 versus 35,000 with those in high diversity. Market share, the chart shows that 60% of businesses with high levels of racial and ethnic diversity are more likely to report higher than average percentages of market share, compared with 59% with medium and 45% with low diversity. And to prove that the world is not perfect, though one could emphasize that those that are low in diversity are less likely to report higher than average profits than those that are medium or high diversity. But I know your instinct still tells you to be a little bit skeptical, and so even these numbers you don't believe yet. Hold on just one second. Because surely there are additional factors that we need to take into consideration before we are willing to make the claim that diversity pays. And so there are additional factors that we take into consideration, like the legal form of the business organization. Is it the size of the organization, the age of the organization, the industrial sector that it's in, and what region of the country it's located in. And these are factors that arguably could also have an effect on profitability, sales revenue, number of customers, et cetera. And so, in a sense, what we're saying is, once we compare apples to apples, do we still see an impact of diversity per se? And I'm going to skip over this, but just to show you that these companies do differ by these things. Okay. And so what I did is a multivariate analysis that talks about once we take into consideration these additional factors like the size of the company, the age of the company, what sector it's in, et cetera, do we have a link between the racial and ethnic composition of that company and, in this case, its sales revenue? And so to simplify, well, to present this graphically, I've presented this. And I think most people will be able to read this. That net of these other factors, yes, diversity still has the kind of impact that the business case for diversity claims. And in fact, what the analysis shows is that racial and ethnic diversity not only has a significant impact, it's among the largest factors in terms of sales revenue for these companies. And when we talk about number of customers, same basic pattern. And again, not only is it a significant effect, it is among the largest effects of things like the size of the company, et cetera. Okay? And so, now I'm not presenting the same information for profitability, but trust me, it's the same pattern. I could show you all four of these.